At 01:47 a.m., a single line appeared on an internal operations board that almost no one outside logistics ever saw. Asset status: unresolved. It referred to an M1A1 Abrams, 60 tons of armored steel, assigned to a National Guard motor pool in the Appalachian region. According to procedure, that status should have been impossible. Tanks do not disappear quietly. They do not roll out unnoticed. They do not leave without paperwork, escorts, transponders, and layers of accountability. Yet sometime after midnight, one had. The recovery order did not come with urgency. That was the first anomaly. No alarms, no statewide alert, no press involvement. Just a controlled tasking issued to a small joint team, active duty personnel attached to Guard logistics, authorized not to pursue suspects, not to engage, only to recover government property. The phrasing mattered. Recovery, not interception. By the time the convoy assembled, a cold front had settled into the mountains. Rain drifted sideways through the valleys, turning the roads black and reflective. 2 unmarked Humvees took point and rear. A single logistics truck followed between them, carrying towing gear that, on paper, should never have been needed. Radios were checked. Weapons were issued, but sealed under restrictive rules of engagement. This was domestic soil. Everything was supposed to stay clean. Officially, the tank had been last logged inside its fenced motor pool less than 3 hours earlier. Gate logs showed no exit. Cameras had failed simultaneously due to a localized power interruption. GPS and transponder data were missing, not destroyed, removed. That distinction mattered too. Someone had not panicked. Someone had prepared. The route provided by command did not lead toward an interstate or shipping yard. Instead, it cut south, away from population centers, into terrain that predated modern infrastructure. Old coal roads, timber paths, switchbacks, carved into rock long before satellites and digital maps existed. Appalachia has a geography that does not cooperate with oversight. As the convoy moved deeper into the ridges, radio traffic remained minimal. Not silence, something stranger. A faint, periodic squelch on the channel. No voice, no call sign. Just the sound of an open carrier briefly touching the frequency, then disappearing again. No one acknowledged it. By doctrine, unexplained transmissions are logged and ignored until verified. By instinct, they raise alarms. This time, they were allowed to pass. Rain thickened. The smell of wet leaves seeped into the vehicles, mixing with diesel and hot electronics. Visibility dropped to the length of headlights. Every mile marker was counted aloud, not for navigation, but for grounding. When terrain closes in, routines keep panic out. At a junction barely visible beneath overgrowth, the lead vehicle slowed. The road was not on GPS, but it existed on older survey maps, an access route to a decommissioned coal operation shut down decades earlier. The official order came quickly and without discussion. Check the spur. It made no logistical sense. Heavy equipment thieves avoid dead ends. But orders are not debates. The convoy turned. The pavement ended within minutes. Gravel followed, then mud. Tire ruts appeared ahead, fresh, deep, wide enough to suggest a lowboy trailer under extreme load. This was no improvisation. Axle spacing confirmed it. Whoever had moved the tank had the right transport, the right timing, and knowledge of roads that no longer officially existed. At the edge of an abandoned loading yard, engines cut. Rain tapped against steel. Somewhere in the trees, something metallic shifted, too heavy to be wind. On the ground, tread marks veered away from the road toward the hillside. Abrams tread. The tank had not been driven here. It had been delivered, and whatever had unloaded it had not finished yet. If this was a theft, why move the tank into a place designed to be forgotten? And who expected it to be found? What kind of operation hides military armor where maps stop working? By 02:30 a.m., the rain had eased, but the fog thickened, low, dense, and unmoving, as if the valley itself were holding its breath. The abandoned loading yard sat in a shallow bowl carved from the hillside. Cracked concrete pads, rusted conveyors, and the skeletal remains of rail infrastructure marked a place that had once moved thousands of tons of material a day, and now officially moved nothing at all. According to federal records, the site had been inactive for decades. According to the ground beneath their boots, something very heavy had passed through less than an hour earlier. The tread impressions told a precise story. Not chaotic, not hurried. The spacing matched a lowboy trailer rated for extreme weight. The offloading angle was deliberate, controlled. No gouging, no collapse of the earth beneath it. Whoever had done this knew exactly how to unload an Abrams without drawing attention or damaging the ground. That narrowed the list of suspects immediately. This was not theft driven by desperation or profit alone. This was execution. The recovery team spread out under strict containment protocol. No lights beyond necessity. No movement beyond line of sight. The site itself offered little shelter, just a few remaining structures and a slope rising sharply behind the yard. That slope is where the tracks led. Behind the largest building, half collapsed and tagged with decades-old warning signs, the ground dipped into darkness. A mine entrance, timber-framed, reinforced. Not a shallow cut either. This was a deep shaft, designed to swallow equipment and keep it hidden from weather, air, and satellites. A rusted chain hung across the entrance, recently disturbed. Mud had been wiped clean where hands had grabbed it. Rainwater pooled around the tracks, carrying faint rainbow sheens of oil and diesel downhill. That smell had returned. Diesel does not linger naturally in sealed earth. It requires engines, generators, ventilation. Inside the mine, the air temperature dropped immediately. Cold stone pulled warmth from exposed skin. The beam of a flashlight reached only a short distance before being swallowed by blackness. Support beams lined the walls, old but reinforced with newer steel brackets, work that did not match the mine's age. Someone had been here recently, and often. Command was notified. The response came, delayed and clipped. Continue reconnaissance. Do not enter fully. Await daylight if necessary. But daylight does not change what is underground. A secondary search of the surrounding yard revealed more. A portable generator, still warm. Fuel drums marked for off-road use. Red dye diesel, the same type authorized for armored vehicles. Welding residue. Clean torch cuts on heavy-gauge steel plates stacked near the wall. These were not scavengers, stripping scrap. This was fabrication. Further downhill, half buried in mud, a single piece of track link was recovered. Bent, scarred, identifiable. It matched the Abrams pattern exactly. A fragment left behind not by accident, but by wear. Evidence of repeated movement. The tank had not simply been hidden here. It had been worked on. As dawn approached, radio traffic degraded further. Standard frequencies gave way to intermittent interference. Not jamming, something subtler. Open carriers, short transmissions without voice. A pattern that did not align with atmospheric conditions or terrain shadowing. Someone nearby was transmitting, and they were careful not to speak. When light finally crept into the valley, the mine entrance revealed its scale. Wide enough for tracked vehicles, reinforced deep into the rock. Fresh scrape marks along the lower beams suggested repeated passage. Inside, the tunnel sloped downward before disappearing into shadow. This was not a dead end. Security was established, motion sensors placed, trip flares set but kept inactive. The team waited, not because they lacked curiosity, but because procedure demanded patience. Then, in the distance, something moved. Not a vehicle on the road, not wind through trees. A low mechanical rumble echoed across the next ridge. Heavy, controlled. Familiar to anyone who had stood near armored engines before. Through gaps in the fog, a silhouette briefly appeared. Large, angular, unmistakably armored. It was not the missing tank. The shape was different. Older, modified, and it was moving under its own power. The fog closed again, swallowing it whole, leaving only the sound of engines idling somewhere beyond sight. If one armored vehicle was already operational in these hills, how many more were hidden where no one was supposed to look? The decision to move inside the mine was not made quickly. By mid-morning, fog still clung to the valley, refusing to lift. The sensors placed overnight had not triggered. No vehicles had emerged, no personnel had been spotted. Yet the evidence outside the entrance had multiplied with daylight. Fresh footprints, drag marks, subtle changes in airflow that suggested active ventilation deeper inside the rock. The mine was alive. Authorization finally came through in limited form. A short interior sweep, no deep penetration, no engagement unless directly threatened. Documentation only. The language of the order was careful, almost reluctant, as if whoever approved it understood that what lay inside could not easily be categorized once seen. 3 personnel entered, 1 forward, 1 rear, 1 dedicated to hazard assessment. Night vision engaged as ambient light died within the first 30 yards. The temperature dropped further. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, echoing off stone in slow, uneven intervals that distorted distance. The tunnel walls told a story that the exterior could not. Chalk markings appeared at regular intervals, numbers, arrows, symbols that did not match mining codes. They were recent, clean, written with purpose. This was a navigational system, not graffiti. At a widened chamber, the first major discovery waited in silence. A stripped, armored hull sat elevated on wooden blocks. No turret, no engine deck. Torch marks scored the sides where components had been removed cleanly, not torn away. Around it lay organized stacks of armor plating, spare track pads and labeled crates sealed against moisture. This was not storage. It was a workshop. Portable lighting rigs hung from improvised hooks. Welding masks lay beside tool cases. A generator hummed quietly in the background. Its exhaust routed through ducting that disappeared into a secondary shaft. Airflow had been engineered here. Someone had planned to stay. The smell of diesel and heated metal hung heavy, mixing with damp stone. It burned the throat slightly, the way enclosed engine spaces always do. No traps were found. No signs of rushed departure. That absence was more unsettling than chaos would have been. Whoever had used this space had not fled. They had stepped away with confidence. Deeper in, the tunnel split. One branch narrowed and climbed. The other descended toward a faint orange glow reflecting off wet rock. Electrical light, active, unmistakable. The team advanced slowly, every step measured, the sound of boots amplified by the stone. At the next bend, the source of the glow came into view. An intact M1A1 Abrams, the missing tank. Its engine idled low, steady, perfectly tuned. Diagnostic cables ran from an open rear panel to a laptop mounted on a workbench beside it. The screen displayed maintenance software restricted to authorized military systems, software that does not exist in civilian channels. This was not reverse engineering. This was direct access. The tank was not damaged, not stripped, not modified yet. It was being prepared. Serial numbers confirmed it. This was the asset logged missing hours earlier. Warm to the touch. Hydraulics pressurized. Power flowing through systems that should have been locked behind layers of authentication. Attempts to contact command failed. Radios returned only static and intermittent carrier signals. The same unexplained squelch returned, closer now, sharper, as if the source was no longer distant. Then came the sound. Metal shifting behind them. A door closing somewhere above. Air pressure changed subtly as ventilation slowed. The generator lights flickered. Someone had sealed the entrance. The team withdrew toward the larger chamber, weapons raised but unfired. Rules of engagement remained in effect. There was still no visible hostile presence, just absence and control. Oxygen readings remained stable, but not indefinitely. Whoever controlled the environment could decide how long that remained true. From deeper within the mine, another sound emerged. Chains dragging, heavy equipment being moved by hand or winch. Slow, deliberate, not hurried. This site was not defensive, it was operational. Behind a stack of crates, a steel plate partially covered a vertical shaft. Weld marks showed recent cutting. Cold air rushed upward when the edge was pried loose, carrying with it the strongest diesel odor yet. Below was another level, concrete reinforced, wide enough for vehicles. A ramp spiraled downward into darkness, its surface scored with fresh track marks. Someone had expanded this mine beyond its original design. The realization settled heavily. The stolen tank was not an endpoint. It was part of a system, one designed to move armored vehicles underground, out of sight, and onto networks no longer officially monitored. The mine was not hiding equipment. It was feeding something larger. The ramp descended at a shallow angle, engineered rather than carved. Its surface was poured concrete, not stone, reinforced with steel ribs set at regular intervals. This was not a relic of mining operations. It was newer, quietly added long after the site had been declared inactive. With every step downward, the sound grew clearer. Engines, more than one, idling in staggered rhythm, as if synchronized to avoid drawing too much load at once. The air changed as well, warmer, thicker. Diesel exhaust trapped and recirculated through makeshift ventilation ducts, bolted to the walls. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a chamber that should not have existed. Floodlights lined the perimeter, powered by a generator the size of a small vehicle, its vibration steady and controlled. Cables ran along the floor, bundled and labeled. Tool stations were arranged with the precision of a motor pool, not a hideout. This was a workspace built by people who expected inspections, even if none were scheduled. In the center sat the Abrams, not parked, positioned. Its turret faced a rail platform that extended into a side tunnel, where old tracks, long presumed abandoned, had been cleared, repaired, and reinforced. A flat car waited there, partially loaded with armor panels and crates, stamped with multiple depot codes. Some were current. Others belonged to facilities decommissioned years ago. The tank's engine was running, its systems live. Diagnostic terminals mirrored the data from above, lines of code scrolling across screens that required credentials no civilian should possess. Someone had been updating control units, testing responses, calibrating inputs. This tank was being readied for movement. Behind a curtain of welding tarp, another vehicle waited. Not an Abrams, smaller, older. A hybrid, patched armor plates welded onto a mismatched hull, turret ring modified, electronics rerouted. It bore no markings, no serials, just function. This was not a one-off operation. Maps covered one wall, satellite imagery, rail yards circled in red, National Guard storage sites marked alongside commercial freight hubs. The geography spanned multiple states. The pattern was unmistakable. A logistics network. Movement above interrupted the inspection. Footsteps on metal grating. The lights flickered once, then stabilized. Someone was active in the upper levels, adjusting systems, responding to the presence below. Radio interference intensified. A voice cut through the static, calm, controlled, using procedural language that almost matched command structure, but missed key authentication elements. It ordered the team to hold position. No call sign, no verification. It was not a mistake. Someone else was using the frequency on purpose. The generators surged briefly, then settled. Ventilation slowed. The message was clear without being spoken. This space was controlled, and the controls were not in friendly hands. Movement returned near the rail platform. Figures appeared briefly at the edge of the lights, then withdrew. No uniforms, no visible insignia. Their posture was disciplined, familiar. They did not rush. They did not panic. They knew the terrain. Power dropped suddenly. Floodlights died. Darkness swallowed the chamber, leaving only the low rumble of engines and the faint glow of exhaust heat visible through night optics. The Abrams engine revved once, then returned to idle. Remote control. Whoever had configured this system did not need to be inside the tank. The generator was cut deliberately moments later. Silence rushed in, broken only by cooling metal and distant machinery deeper within the rock. That machinery was heavier than a tank. The sound traveled through the floor, through the walls, as if the mine itself were part of a larger structure. Another level existed below. Behind stacked crates, a welded access plate was forced open, revealing a reinforced shaft descending further than expected. Cold air surged upward, carrying oil, diesel, and the unmistakable smell of active mechanical systems. This was no longer about recovering a stolen vehicle. The tank was a component. The mine was a node. And whatever was operating here had been built to function without permission, without oversight, and without ever appearing on official records. By the time the generator went dark, the silence inside the mine felt engineered. Not natural silence, controlled silence. The kind that follows a system being powered down in stages, not shut off in panic. Airflow slowed, but did not stop. Oxygen levels held steady. Someone had calculated exactly how long people could remain underground without triggering distress. That alone confirmed it. This place was designed to hold personnel, not just machines. With primary power offline, emergency lighting activated along the lower walls, dim amber strips embedded in the concrete, barely visible unless you knew where to look. That infrastructure did not belong to an abandoned mine. It belonged to a facility that expected inspections, contingencies, and prolonged occupation. Movement echoed from the shaft below. Slower now. Heavier. Whatever had been running down there was being repositioned, not evacuated. The sound of steel against steel carried upward through the ramp like a pulse. A decision had already been made, just not by the team underground. Attempts to reach higher command continued to fail. Even emergency bands returned nothing but carrier noise, open lines with no voice. That pattern was intentional. Jamming would have been easier. This was selective isolation. Someone wanted the team cut off, but still listening. Above-ground sensors triggered briefly, then went silent. Motion without entry. Vehicles moving around the perimeter, not approaching, not retreating. Containment without confrontation. When the team moved back toward the upper chamber, the mine entrance was no longer visible. A reinforced steel gate had been drawn across the passage and locked from the outside. Fresh weld marks glowed faintly where seams had been reinforced. They had been sealed in deliberately. Oxygen remained, stable, but time had become a factor. The decision was made to prepare an exit without escalating the situation. Breaching tools were used sparingly. A controlled cut, minimal noise, no collapse risk. The gate opened just enough. Outside, the yard had changed. 2 vehicles were gone, the logistics truck, 1 Humvee. Their radio mounts had been removed cleanly. No signs of struggle, no shell casings, no blood. Tracks showed towing, not driving. Personnel were missing. That fact was never addressed on the open channel. From the tree line, figures watched, not hiding, not advancing, observing. Their stance gave them away, trained, balanced, patient, not militia, not contractors pretending to be something else. They carried themselves like people used to operating under orders that never appear in writing. A transmission cut in, clean and clear. Stand down, area secured, recovery complete. The voice was calm, authoritative. Wrong. No authentication followed. No unit, identification, just repetition of the instruction. Moments later, another convoy arrived, unmarked, matte green, moving with confidence. A crane truck, a flatbed, personnel in mixed attire. They did not ask questions. They did not acknowledge the recovery team beyond a glance. They went straight to work. Cables were cut, tarps deployed, vehicles repositioned, evidence covered. The operation unfolded with rehearsed efficiency, as if this exact scenario had been anticipated long before the tank ever moved. When challenged, the response was minimal. "You're out of your tasking lane." That was all. The missing Abrams was secured, not recovered. Loaded, not documented. Moved toward a route that bypassed both highway and registry. The hybrid hull followed behind it, shrouded and chained. No paperwork changed hands. No signatures were offered. When the convoy departed, the mine entrance was welded shut behind it. Fresh concrete poured over seams, hazard placards installed that referenced a project number, not a location. By the time higher command finally responded, hours later, the message was brief. Mission complete. Asset secured. No further action required. There was no mention of the additional vehicles. No acknowledgement of missing personnel. No curiosity about unauthorized infrastructure or altered rail lines. The silence was the answer. Recovery had never been the objective. Containment was. And whatever had been operating beneath those mountains was important enough that its existence outweighed the loss of men, records, and truth. The official version of the operation was finalized within 48 hours. It fit into a single paragraph. A tank had been removed without authorization. A recovery team had been deployed. The asset was secured by a specialized unit. No hostile contact occurred. The situation was resolved. Case closed. There were no appendices, no maps, no mention of a mine, a rail spur, modified vehicles, or missing personnel. The report did not explain why a domestic armored recovery required unmarked convoys, or why communication logs showed hours of unexplained carrier noise with no voice traffic. Those anomalies were categorized as environmental interference and quietly archived. Equipment returned to inventory under a new serial verification. GPS protocols were updated, access keys rotated, guard schedules doubled. A sealed memo circulated, reminding units that certain movements fell under restricted visibility authorities. It was unsigned. The recovery team was dispersed. Some were reassigned within weeks. Others transferred bases without explanation. Requests for follow-up briefings were declined, under the same phrase every time: "Not in your lane." The mine site itself disappeared faster than the paperwork. Fresh fencing appeared. Concrete sealed the entrance. A government hazard placard replaced the old mining signage, listing a project code that did not match any public registry. Satellite imagery updated months later showed disturbed Earth smoothed clean, as if the mountain had exhaled and closed back in on itself. Nothing on the surface suggested heavy machinery had ever moved there. But patterns leave echoes. Within a year, similar incidents surfaced quietly across logistics circles. Not tanks, never that visible again, but heavy equipment relocations logged retroactively. Rail permits issued for lines believed inactive. Contractors appearing at depots with perfect documentation that traced back to shell entities dissolved weeks later. Each incident closed cleanly. Each involved silence afterward. People who worked long enough in logistics began to notice something else. When these movements occurred, communications behaved oddly. Radios would open without voice. Dead channels would click once at regular intervals, as if being tested, not jammed, not hacked, simply occupied. Someone was always listening first. The tank in Appalachia had not been stolen for profit. 60 tons of armor is not liquid. It cannot vanish into the black market without leaving scars. It had been moved because it fit into a capability that already existed, one that required armor, rail access, and terrain that swallowed signals. A capability built for contingencies that were never publicly named. What kind of conflict demands armored mobility inside national borders, off the books, shielded from oversight? Not invasion, not riot control, not disaster response. Something quieter, something designed to function if command structures fractured, if records failed, if the war never officially began, but still needed to be fought in shadows. Years later, a former logistics officer drove back through those mountains out of curiosity. The road that once led to the mine now ended at a locked gate and fresh gravel. The air smelled clean. No diesel, no oil, just wet leaves and silence. Until he turned off the engine. For a moment in the quiet, a familiar sound drifted through the static of his truck radio. One soft click, then nothing. He waited. It did not repeat. That was the unsettling part. Because the clicks had never been random. They had always come in patterns, testing intervals, synchronization checks. The absence of the sound meant whatever system once operated there no longer needed to probe the frequency. It had moved on. Somewhere else, steel would be moving again, through tunnels, rail spurs, or forgotten infrastructure, laid down for other eras and repurposed for contingencies no one would ever acknowledge. The paperwork would follow later, if at all. The war that never was does not announce itself. It prepares. It builds redundancies. And when it is finished, it leaves behind nothing but sealed files, reassigned names, and places that look empty unless you know exactly what to listen for.